Yo, Saw dudes, El Toro Ryan here. So I've got a little theory regarding the newly announced West Coast racers. So pretty much I believe that the block system of the ride is essentially going to force the ride to duel every time, but only when it's running all three trains. So before you question the ride, yes, this is a Mobius coaster and you will definitely be riding it on both sides of the track, right? Just kind of like Twisted Colossus, right? Not like Racer or Kennywood. So now if you're unfamiliar with what a block system is, let me explain. So a block system is a computer regulation that, for safety, separates the track of a roller coaster into different sections or blocks. So only one train is allowed to occupy one block at a time, and at the end of a block, there must be a way for a train to stop in case the next block is occupied. Right, so let's take a look at a similar dueling ride also found at Magic Mountain, Twisted Colossus. I'm sure many of you know that ride. That ride's totally kick-ass. I love that ride. So this ride offers a similar dueling experience as West Coast Racers, but it all depends on how quickly the trains in the station are loaded and then dispatched. So if a train is not loaded fast enough, then it simply doesn't duel. So when the ride stacks, the train on the second lift hill will continue to drop off the lift hill and head towards the final brake run because the block system of the ride allows that to happen. So while a train is loading in the station, there are enough blocks to allow for a train to be parked directly behind the station in what's called the waiting brake, as well as behind the waiting brake, and are commonly referred to as the safety brakes. This way, when Twisted Colossus is running all three trains, it can comfortably stack two trains in the brake run, while the third train is in the station loading. But based off the animations released by Magic Mountain, this doesn't really appear to be the case with West Coast Racers. The block system here is a little bit different. It hasn't really been stated officially. It looks like the ride's going to have three trains like Twisted Colossus, but let's take a look at the final brake run. So as the train is approaching the station, right, you'll see a sloped brake run, and pretty much this is going to act as a trim, right? This is just going to slow down and bleed off most of the train's speed. So you can kind of think of this trim like the one after the final overbank turn on Millennium Force. So the trim on that ride basically just bleeds off most of the train's speed, and then the train kind of enters the waiting brake right behind the unload station where it actually stops. So magnetic brakes technically cannot physically bring a train to a complete stop, and especially on a downward slope section of track. So there's got to be something that physically contacts the train in order for it to completely stop, which is usually a friction brake or a drive tire on most rides. Some other rides, it's LSMs. Going back to West Coast Racer, it appears that the train bleeds off most of its speed on that trim, similar to Millennium Force does, and then the train immediately enters the station building and stops just before the actual station where trains are loading and what will be the waiting brake. So this means that the final brake run can only hold one train, since that trim does not count as a block, right? Just like in the case of Millennium Force, where its final brake run can only hold one train. So let's pretend a train is still loading in the station and the train behind it comes to a stop in the final brake run. It will have to stop in the waiting brake just behind the station. But because the final brake run only contains one block, that means that only one train can occupy the final brake run. So let's take a look at the third train that's currently on the course. So it's just cleared the pit stop, right? It's rolling out of the pit stop and it's heading up to what would be the third launch on the ride. So it technically is unable to launch following that pit stop until the train in the waiting brake clears that block and enters the station. But because the train in the station needs to dispatch as well in order for the train in the waiting brake to enter the station, that means that you automatically have two trains on the launch track, right? On the yellow track and the white track. Now at this point, the two trains are probably going to be programmed to launch together at the same time, right? Just because they're both going to be available by default, I would assume that the computer is just going to launch both of them, right at the same time. Now this makes sense to me for a few reasons. Take a look at both of the launches in the middle of the ride, right? So I don't believe that these launches are considered blocks, right? So if they were blocks, then you could theoretically stack a train in the station, waiting brake, and now the fourth launch, which is kind of far away from the station in a concrete drainage ditch. Right, so what happens if a train stacks here, then the ride actually ends up breaking down and then it needs to be evacuated? It's kind of a little ways from the station, right, in a little ditch. It's kind of takes more effort to evacuate a train that's further away from the station than when it's closer. So the pit stop actually appears to be a nice design element. Right, so it serves the purpose of entertaining riders for a brief moment while they wait for the next train to be loaded so they can duel that one. Kind of similar to the shed on Mystic Timbers, right? So you're entertained while you stack behind the train at the station. But this also allows for the opportunity to easily evacuate trains in case of a breakdown. So rather than having a train stuck out in the middle of the course, you now have an easily accessible train right in the station building, right? Just in the pit stop kind of to the left of the station, right? But it's still the same building. Or if a train is on the launch track, it simply needs to be manually reversed into the pit stop. I'm sure there will be catwalks in the area enough that the animation doesn't have that. I'm sure it would make things a little easier. Now, just to conclude, this is purely all my own speculation, right? My ride operator background kind of came in and kicked in when I saw the ride. I'm just trying to figure out how this thing's going to function. Hopefully the video made sense to you. If it didn't, be sure to ask questions in the comments below. I'll try to answer anything. And be sure to subscribe as well if you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching, guys, and have a good one.